Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. All right, so today we have some extra special guests here to talk about ice damage on trees. I don't know if your area was hit with an ice storm, but a lot of areas were, and there has been some significant tree damage that's occurred. What we want to do is to help you learn what to do and what not to do. So we have our urban forestry specialist from WVU, Professor Greg Dahle.
Hello, everyone.
And we have our woodland forest specialist from WVU Extension, Dr. Dave McGill.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having us.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about woodland management, and then we're going to slide into urban tree management. Dave, could you give us a brief review about how to know what trees have to go in your woodlot, when you should recognize that they might become a danger?
Well, that's a good question. Some are obvious, some are probably not so obvious. The obvious ones are probably the ones that are on the ground or split in two or have broken branches up top. There's a point in time that it kind of does become difficult where you might see some damage in the kind of upper crown, but those are usually okay. A lot of our woodland tree species have the ability to respond to these ice storms. This latest ice storm is nothing new. We've had these come and go, and I remember being up at a research forest at a conference during an ice storm and walking outside and hearing the branches breaking as, every 5 or 10 minutes you'd hear a big tree come down. So this is nothing new. Back in 2003, there was something like 300,000 acres of severely damaged woodlands in our state. The state forester at the time had them flown and really documented them well, kind of around the central part of the state on the western side. So these ice storms are nothing new, but they always seem to catch us off guard. So once these happen, you have to go out and kind of assess the damage. And it's kind of a particularly hazardous time to do that too, because depending on the severity of the damage, your woods could look completely different than you're accustomed to. Trees down, broken branches, things hanging all over the place. It all depends on the amount of damage you have.
So how would someone know when they need to call in someone? When do you need to take action, have a harvest, or, what should you do if someone shows up on your door and says, hey, your trees look terrible. Why don't you let me take care of them for you?
Great question. Probably not the easiest answer. Again, each case is going to be different depending on the amount of damage on the property, the number of trees that are fallen, the access that is available to people who cut trees. A lot of people see the damage and they get kind of upset, of course, and immediately think they've lost a lot of the value in their woods. And so they reach out and try and sell timber. It's not the greatest time to sell timber when everyone else is trying to sell timber. So the main point is, after an ice storm, is really to remain calm, like any kind of an emergency. Remain calm, think clearly, and reach out to people who can kind of give you some insight. One of our first points of contact is the West Virginia Division of Forestry. They're the ones out there on the roads and clearing access for emergency vehicles, emergency responders, and working with all the volunteer fire companies to help out in emergency situations. And so they're always a good first point of contact to call, easy to access, wvforestry.com, click landowner assistance, and that'll lead you to consulting foresters and service foresters that you can call up, the ones from your county, and have them come out and take a look. So that's one way you can do it. You can also call consulting foresters, and they'll come out and look at your property. If you're thinking about selling the timber that's damaged, they can do that. And then there's people who just work in the woods, loggers. If you have severe damage, they can help you clear property. But we always recommend talking to a forester first and getting some insight to the amount of damage that's done on your property.
So Dave, help our listeners better understand what a consulting forester is and what they do.
Well, consulting foresters, we always contrast the three main kinds of foresters. The county service foresters, they're the government foresters. They're the ones that drive around with a maple leaf on their truck. They're paid for by the government. They're public servants. And then there are consulting foresters, private consultants that work for landowners. And then the third type are procurement foresters that work for mills and go out and procure timber for their mills. And the middle one, the consulting foresters, they come out to your property and they can do a whole number of things. They can give you, they administer timber sales. If you're interested in selling timber, they can help you with that. If you're interested in improving your woods through timber stand improvements, they can give you guidance and get you set up with cost sharing programs that can help you with that. If you've had any kind of timber theft on your property, they can go out and make some kind of estimates for the number of trees that may have been taken illegally. So they do a whole suite of things, and and you can actually find them on the West Virginia Division of Forestry webpage under the consulting foresters list.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Also, you mentioned a forest management plan, and we talk a lot on this show about having a farm management plan. Can you tell us a little bit, just a quick review of why it's important to have a forest management plan?
Yeah, right now, one of the things that I mentioned that, ice storms kind of can catch us off guard, or do catch us off guard, because they're not so uncommon, but when they come, it's kind of a surprise for some reason. And so this is a good time to have a forest stewardship plan, or we call it a woodland management plan. And the thing about that is it kind of gives you an idea, an assessment of how much wood you have, how much timber you have out on your property. And, if for a number of reasons, there are ways you can, if that timber is damaged, you can kind of account for that in your tax treatment and in your income kind of stream. But the forest stewardship plan really is kind of a comprehensive plan about your woods. Generally, the foresters who are writing this plan for you, they'll come in and talk with you kind of extensively, finding out what you want to get out of your woods, what it means to you, how much you use it, and kind of where you want to go. We say the forest stewardship plan is to help you, guide you to arrive at your ideal woodlands. And so the planning part of the stewardship plan is important. Forest stewardship plan is important, but also kind of this visioning and accounting for what you have at a particular time.
So is there any way for a landowner to know if their logger or forester really knows their stuff, or has gotten good training?
Well, most of the foresters in our state are registered with the West Virginia Board of Registration for Foresters, and that kind of is the minimum credential that landowners can use to check it out. The West Virginia Board of Registration for Foresters has a list of currently registered foresters, and basically I have to say registered foresters and forestry technicians, because they all have backgrounds in forestry. They're just a little bit different. The registered forester and registered forestry technicians, they have to have education from a forestry institution and a set amount of experience. So at least that gives landowners an idea of some of the people who have at least education and experience in forestry. Most of the people that are in the business of forestry have been in for quite a while, and the more experience you get in forestry, the kind of the more insight you have into how the woods work and the opportunities that are available for woodland owners.
Now, I do want to make sure we throw out there that if you are having a timber harvest on your property, it does need to be registered with the state, and that is usually the responsibility of the logger or the forester, but it can be the landowner's responsibility. Can we talk a little bit about those responsibilities?
That's a great point, Karen. When you get into a timber transaction, especially, that's the big item in woodland management is having a timber sale. A lot of people try to get into these things themselves and think they're a great negotiator, but generally, if you've never sold timber, you're going to be dealing with people who do it for their livelihoods. And so you are working against or with some very experienced people. So that's one reason we always recommend having a forester of some type, whether that's the Division of Forestry foresters, the county foresters, the consulting foresters, or a procurement forester. And so not having those people there to talk with you and tell you as a landowner what your responsibilities are is kind of puts you at a disadvantage. I mean, if you are working with a logger, or it's just someone who's cutting your timber and hauling it down to the wood yard, you are responsible for, if the water gets polluted, they're going to come knocking at your door. If your logger's getting mud on the highway, they're probably going to come knocking at your door. So there's a lot of responsibilities in doing forest operations that landowners really need to pay attention to. And again, having a forester there to be your advisor at least is a great idea.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate your input on that. Now I want to move on to talking about trees that are a little closer to home, perhaps, and trees that are in urban or suburban areas, even park systems or areas where there are a lot of trails and a lot of use. So we have Greg Dahle, who is going to be talking about, well, I guess I'll just go ahead and ask him. Greg, what makes a tree dangerous?
Thanks, Karen. In the urban-suburban setting, trees are not inherently dangerous, but because of their large size, I guess they have, if they fail, they have an opportunity to hit a car or hit a house or cause some big issues. So what makes a tree dangerous? Usually something's wrong with it. Some defect is wrong with it. We typically do not see healthy, defect-free trees falling or failing. If there's decay in the root system or in the trunk or maybe even in one of the branches or a number of the branches, we're more likely to see that tree as being dangerous. If there's poor branch structure, if the tree hasn't been taken care of as it's been growing and it develops codominant stems, trunks, or codominant branches, would be more likely to think of that tree as carrying danger because it's more likely to fail. And I find it interesting as I chat with people, they often get worried about having trees near their houses or their places that they're working and living. And I want to stress tree failures that cause fatalities are not really that common in the urban and suburban areas. In fact, an average of tree wind-related failures from 1995 to 2007 found that there was only on average about 31 fatalities due to trees annually. And while I don't like any tree failures to cause fatalities, just to put that number of 31 per year in perspective, that's about equal with how many salmonella deaths that we see in the U.S. on an average year. If we compare that to unintentional firearm deaths, that's 16 times more fatalities due to unintentional firearms. And when we look at, comparing it to motor vehicle accidents, 20 times more bicyclists die from being struck by motor vehicles. 160 times more pedestrians die on an annual basis, and almost 8,000, almost 9,000, over 200 times more people die in automobile accidents than having trees fall them on an annual basis.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective. A lot of times people do panic when there's been a storm and they have a tree, or if a storm is coming, they want to make sure that they can protect their home and their cars and their neighbors and themselves, of course. So what can a person do to help make sure their tree isn't going to cause a hazard or be dangerous?
In my mind, hiring what we call a certified arborist is the best thing you can do to have them he or she come out and take a look at your trees. A certified arborist is someone that has the baseline competency. They've had, in order to become a certified arborist, they have to have a certain number of years of experience, as well as pass a test, and then they have to maintain that certification with continuing education units that they get on an annual and every 3-year basis. What I find really nice about this certification program, the Certified Arborist program, there's a code of ethics that the arborist has to abide by, which means that they should be giving you the best information on how to care for that tree in your yard. And if you're interested, you can find certified arborists in your area. You just need to go to the website treesaregood.com. Again, that's one word, treesaregood.com. Another thing I would really strongly encourage people, if they're looking to hire an arborist, either before a storm to take care of the tree or even after a storm damage, make sure that arborist and the company has proof of insurance and they can document that proof of insurance with you. That way, if something goes wrong while they're working on your site, they have the insurance to make sure that everything's going to be taken care of.
Yeah, that insurance is something a lot of people don't think about. But, when you're climbing in a tree, whether you're using a bucket or if you're using ropes, that can be a fairly dangerous thing to do. So you're up there with a chainsaw and cutting limbs out, whether you're up high or down low, there's danger involved. And so if your company doesn't have the proper liability insurance, then that liability then turns around and falls directly on the homeowner. So checking the insurance is important to do whenever you're hiring a professional tree pruner. In this case, an ISA certified arborist. Now, not all tree pruners out there are arborists. And as a result, there is a very common tree pruning practice called topping. Greg, I'd like you to address the myth that topping can actually make a tree better or reduce the danger associated with storm damage.
Gladly, Karen. I'm not a proponent for topping for a variety of reasons. To define what we mean when Karen and I speak about topping, it's the cutting back a limb, a branch down back to a specific spot, a certain height, a pre-described height. Typically, when we prune trees, we prune branches back to the point that they started on the main trunk, or we're pruning it back to a small enough branch, or a sizable branch, I guess I should say, that can take over the role of the main stem, the main direction of growth. So topping is making large heading cuts at kind of indiscriminate in predetermined heights and not following the structure of the tree to dictate where you want to make that pruning cut. And a lot of people do this thinking that they see it done all the time and they think that this is going to make the tree safer. Well, unfortunately, when you make those larger pruning cuts, topping cuts, I should call them, you see a lot of decay build up in the central trunk or in the branch itself that's remaining. And so once you start having decay build up, that section of the tree is more likely to fail during a storm or even on a quiet, stormless, windless day. Second of all, topping robs the tree of its factories, the leaves. If we think about photosynthesis occurs in the leaves, that's taking the solar energy and fixing it into sugar, making the sugars for the tree to be able to grow. When we rob the tree of all those leaves, it takes a lot of energy of its stored energy, and it takes that stored energy to produce new branches, trying to recover its leaf area, trying to rebuild its factories. And when it uses a lot of that stored energy, it has less energy to ward off decay, it ward off insects that may try to attack it or other pathogens. So it really robs the tree of a lot of its stored energy. And worse, a lot of those branches that arise after heading cuts, that grow back after honey cuts, they grow back really fast and they almost recapture the height of that original height of the tree fairly quickly within 2 or 4 years. So you really haven't done much to reduce the height of the tree, which people think is problematic, which it isn't. It also, those branches that arise after a heading cut, they're called epicormic sprouts. And science has shown that those sprouts are not strongly attached to the main trunk. So they're more at risk of failing during ice storms or heavy windstorms. So all in all, collectively, there's not any benefits to topping and a lot of drawbacks to the tree and the tree's long-term health, as well as you're more likely to see failures coming down on your house or your car or your picnic table.
Wow. Yeah, that can get pretty scary pretty fast. And it's unfortunate that it is such a common practice and that it is so very harmful to our trees. So there are things you can do even from the very beginning, before you put your tree in the ground, to help improve the long-term health and safety of that tree. And part of that is going to be associated with species selection, but also putting it in the right place. So there is a program, and we don't have enough time to get into too much detail on it, but it's putting the right tree in the right place. And you can check with local arborists or find information at treesaregood.com to learn more about what trees should go in the right place. Or, of course, you can contact someone locally. But there's also proper pruning to help prevent damage. And I just want to touch a little bit on why it's important to prune a tree when it's young.
Great question, Karen. You know, I know all three of us talking today are parents, and I think of taking care of trees when they're young just like being a parent. You're trying to work with your children as a parent when they're young to correct any things that you don't like. If they're making mistakes, you're trying to help them learn how to do things right. If you caught your child stealing from their sibling, you're trying to tell them stealing is bad. And that same philosophy is what we do with trees. When you plant them in the ground, the first research and a lot of practitioners will tell you the first 20 to 25 years of that tree's life in the ground is the best time to actively prune it. Early on, I talked about codominant branches. You're trying to prune the tree to minimize these structural issues that we know, or these issues that we know will be structural problems long-term in that crown. And it's easy to make those corrective prunings when that branch is only an inch or two or even less, half an inch in size. So working when the tree is young, you can make those corrective prunings and develop a really strong structural tree long-term. And that way, after it gets to be 25, 30 years, it can live another 50 to 100, or maybe if you're lucky, 200 years, and be a nice, strong tree long-term.
All right. Well, thank you very much for both of our speakers. I want to give each of you an opportunity to give us any last important points that you want to make sure that people recognize to follow through with when they're looking at a tree that may have been damaged by a storm, or maybe they're just trying to prevent some storm damage down the road. Dave, since you went first, I'll let you go first on this section as well.
Safety is the primary thing here. As I may have mentioned before, once an ice storm comes, your woods may look completely different than you remember it prior to the ice storm. All the down debris and branches and potentially down trees. So it creates all sorts of hazards. And one of the ones we point out are these spring poles. If a tree comes down and there's smaller trees underneath it, they can bend, and that bend has an enormous amount of energy in it. And if you go and try and cut on that thing, that could severely injure you if it breaks, or when it breaks, it snaps, just like a bow snapping. So that's one hazard. Another hazard is just the debris on the ground. Slips, trips, and falls. That's very common. So if you're out there trying to cut damaged trees down, one of the primary things about using a chainsaw and cutting a tree is know where your escape route is, know where you're going to go as the tree is falling. And so if you have all this debris on the ground, you haven't cleared it away prior to cutting the tree, you could be in for some troubles there. So safety is really the primary concern when you're going out into an ice-damaged forest.
Thank you. Those are very important points.
Good. One other thing is, people may be out there trying to clean up their woods and making debris piles that they might burn a little later. We just started our first fire season of the year. It's March 1st to May 31st. The second one is October 1st to December 31st. And those are times that you are not to have a fire burning between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. without a permit. So be very careful if you're going to burn piles to make sure you've done all the safety clearing around them and make sure you're in the proper season to do that.
Excellent point. Thank you for bringing up our fire season. Thank you very much, Dave. And Greg, any last comments from you?
Yes, I'd like to couple on safety, as Dave just spoke about it. Another safety issue when you're looking at storm damage on trees, this is the urban sector, but it also works very much in the rural sector. Make sure you look around and you take a look at if those trees are near power lines, and even the service drop, the lower voltage that's coming from the transformer to your house or to the building structure. If the trees are anywhere near those, you really do not want to work on those trees. Even if you know that there's power outage right now, in 10 minutes or 20 minutes, your neighbor down the street may be out of power, or it may turn on a generator, which could backfeed that electricity even to your house. So always be very cautious with trees when they're associated around power lines, the high voltage or the low voltage. Lastly, I just want to circle back towards the certified arborist. I think it can be very beneficial to work with one, even to have them come out and look at your property and talk to you about your trees and address potential issues, or let you know that things are just fine. She or he can be a very good resource to help you. And don't be afraid to pick up a book or look at a YouTube video on how to prune trees. If you've recently planted trees, you can do a lot by doing young tree pruning, and it's not that difficult to learn how to do this.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you. I will put all of your suggested links in the show notes for those who are listening to the podcast, so they have access to them later, or they can visit the WVU Extension website. We do have some publications posted there. And if you have any questions, you can always contact your local Extension office, or in this case, reach out to your local service forester or consultant forester or certified arborist. So thank you guys very much for being on the show today.
Karen, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
I have really appreciated your input here, and I will look forward to working with you guys again on future productions. So thanks, and have a great day. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.